Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing very well today, Tim. Thank you for asking. Hope everyone who's listening, I hope they're doing very well. Also, the people we have on this episode, we spoke with just last night. So this was a nighttime interview. The parents of a missing individual who we recently spoke about, and always open to having parents on so that they can clear up maybe something that was said on the show or maybe something that was said on another show or in other versions of media, but then to also give this personal account of their missing loved one, which goes so far. But before we get to that, Tim, you know what's going to go pretty far? Just knowing how you're doing.
Okay, I am doing all right over here.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a great conversation last night with Rosa and Robby Calhoun. They are Kay-Alana Turner's parents, and this conversation is pretty emotional, and it's such a frustrating disappearance. And I honestly can't think of another single case that's quite as frustrating, has so many, angles that are ridiculous and are borderline absurd in Kay-Alana's case. So yeah, it was great to speak with Rosa and Robby. And Kay-Alana Turner disappeared from Tomball, Texas, March 10th, 2023. So this is a recent case, a more recent case than we typically cover. But these folks are desperate for answers. They're desperate to find their daughter. And you can hear it in their voice how much they love her and care for her and how much of an amazing person she seems like. So we'll give out the number and email right here. It's findkturner@gmail.com. And there's a phone number on their Facebook page. It's 409-363-0837.
And it's really, really inspirational to hear Rosa and Robby speak about the disappearance of their daughter. The strength that they show is remarkable. They're already in the progress to change legislation to help other families when they're in the situation. And you'll hear this. You'll hear all of the details that go into the day and the moments that Kay-Alana disappeared. And they've rallied together as a family. They've rallied together as a community. And again, super inspirational.
Absolutely. And if you haven't heard part one, you maybe want to go back and listen to that because we do give a breakdown of Kay-Alana's disappearance. And in this conversation, we do speak about her disappearance, but it's a little bit wider. And also in that first episode, we were pretty hard on Kay-Alana's psychiatrist. I feel like rightly so, to be honest, but we did get a message from our friends, Shiloh and Scott at LA Not So Confidential, the podcast, our good friends over there. And they gave us some more information on how complicated a bipolar diagnosis can be. So I just wanted to point that out, that it's more complicated than maybe we gave it credit for in part one, and specifically me in that episode. I just didn't want to dissuade any listeners from seeking psychiatric or psychological help.
Well, it's understandable as well because we know the result of Kay-Alana's story in terms of that day, what she was going through according to the witnesses and her friend and her boyfriend, and we don't know where she is now, so it's frustrating to hear that she was likely misdiagnosed and also her medication was doubled. And it's additionally frustrating because her parents weren't allowed to gain any access to even have her psychiatrist acknowledge that he was in fact her psychiatrist. And that's because of the HIPAA laws. So Rosa and Robby, in addition to trying to change legislations, they're also putting forth efforts to include exceptions to the HIPAA law in extreme circumstances with family members such as this.
All right, everyone. So check out the links in the show notes to follow information, updates about Kay-Alana Turner's disappearance. And we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be right back with Rosa and Robby. Welcome to the podcast, Rosa and Robby Calhoun. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
It's really our pleasure to have you. And I mean, we meet a lot of people as we do this program, and most of the people that we meet, I mean, the majority of them are coming to us on these like very tragic terms as you are. So when we say we really appreciate you coming on, that's genuine. Like, we really do appreciate you coming on, because that's the only way that the actual factual story can be told.
Yes.
We appreciate that opportunity.
Yes, absolutely.
Can we start by hearing a little bit about Kay-Alana? Can you tell us a little bit about who she is and what her personality is like?
Kailana she really is the sweetest, kindest girl. She loves people. She loves to help people. I had gone one time to meet her for lunch and picked her up at her apartment, and we went to get lunch. And when we came back, there was a little homeless man outside, and he was still wearing a hospital robe. He had the hospital bracelet on, and there was poop running all down the back of him. And I was just like kind of standoffish. And Kailana walked up to him, and she put her hand on his shoulder, and she said, "What do you need?" And he said, "I need help." And she ran into her apartment. She got a couple of bottles of water, and she came out, and she was telling him, "Okay, there's a place that you can get a shower. It's just 2 blocks away, and they'll give you clothes and they'll help you." And she just saw that man's need and gave him an answer for what he needed to do. She's always been like that. She loves to help people. Anybody would call her and they had a need, she would jump in her car and go help. You know, it didn't matter what it was. She would just do everything she could to help. She really is very sweet and very kind. And we are at a loss as to what in the world has happened that we are in this situation.
She's also very smart. She was a salutatorian of her high school, multiple scholarships, got full academic scholarship for Lamar University. She did very well at school.
She won $3.68 million in scholarships out of high school. Super smart.
Very intelligent, very headstrong. She's a definite type A personality. If she gets it in her head she's going to do something or wants to learn to do something, she'll do it. The little car that she was driving when she went missing, a little Honda Civic, and it needed a head gasket and a water pump put in it. And so she had talked to a shop, and they actually had diagnosed it and told her what it needed and then gave her a price. And she said, "Well, that's too much. I'll just do it myself." And so she got a notebook and started watching YouTube and found a place somebody would let her use the garage. And for the most part, I'm going to say 80% of that job she did. I helped her a little bit with some of the things. And she has another friend, Viet, her best friend's husband. He helped some on it. But overall, from the YouTube videos she watched and the notes she took, she ramrodded that operation and did most of that work herself just because she figured she could do it, and she did. And that's kind of the way she attacks everything. She's very, very determined, does not give up easily once she gets it in her head that she's going to do something.
I'm sorry, that is so impressive. I mean, did you say a head gasket?
Yes.
I don't even know what that is. My dad was a mechanic my entire life. Like, that's all he would talk about. I should know what a head gasket is. I do know one thing. I would never, ever, no matter how many YouTube videos I watched, be able to... You said 80% of the work she did? I mean, I wouldn't come to 8% of the work on that. I would cause more damage.
Well, I told her, and I've got a little bit of mechanical background. My brother, he's a mechanic, and I know a little myself from back in the day. But I told her, I said, "Baby, I'll front you the money to pay to have this done, because it's not a job that I would have undertook on my own, But she just, nope, we can do this." And sure enough, she got the car fixed, or she fixed the car, head gasket, water pump, a couple other little things. And the next thing you know, she met the troupe Tartanic from the Renaissance Festival, and they invited her to be a part of their troupe, their Irish drum and bagpipe group. And so she learned the little Irish jigs that they danced and the different things that she had to do for that, and jumped in that little car and drove it to Michigan to meet them up there and to work her first Tartanic gig. And so she did that one, and then they came back. They did the Texas Ren Fest, which is over near where she actually has gone missing. And then she worked another one with them, and then she was going to do this season as well. And they're actually back in Michigan now. at the Renaissance Festival, and she would have gone with them again. So yeah, she fixed the car and drove it to Michigan.
She learned to play. What did she learn to play?
She learned the dances. She learned the Irish step dances to go with the bagpipe and drum.
Wow. Okay, that's awesome.
So there, she was like, they would do the dances, and they would also do like, they would hawk the CDs and the T-shirts and things like that. So she, in between the dancing and the music, she would also help them with the selling the merchandise and whatnot. So she loved it. She had a great time, and it was just a whim for her. She had no reason not to do it. She got invited to participate in it, and she had met these folks, and they're real nice people. They are brokenhearted as we are, and they are helping in the festival circuit and the festival community to help spread the word and hand out flyers. They've helped us,
they've handed out thousands and thousands of flyers all over.
So, but anyway, that's again speaks to her determination when she just decides, hey, I'm going to take a shot at this, and then she gives it 100% and is always or most always successful, whatever she decides to try.
When she was little, she was 3 years old, and we were watching the National Spelling Bee, and she said, I do that. She's 3 years old. I said, you want to do that? She said, I do that. Or, okay. And when she started kindergarten, she was already reading and already studying for the National Spelling Bee. She made it to the Houston Chronicle for 2 of the years that she went. And then her final year, it was the PBS Spelling Bee. When I say I've called thousands and thousands of spelling words, most of these words I've never heard or never seen. She studied a lot on her own. So she had English from the roots up. So she did Greek and Latin. So she knew all the blends and everything. But one time I'm calling spelling words, and I said, okay, paradigm. And she said, Mama, is the word paradigm? And I said, I don't know. Spell it and I'll let you know. Well, of course it was. I'd never seen it written out. I'd always heard the word paradigm. I'd never seen it. And so the people at our church would put together a list of words. And every Sunday at church, they'd come up to her and they're like, I've got a word you can't spell. And she could spell it. And they're like, it was amazing to watch her. She just has a humongous vocabulary. And her last year of the spelling bee in Houston, she was 14th. So she was 14 spots away from making it to the National Spelling Bee. So, but as a 3-year-old, she was determined to do that. And all of us just had to go along for the ride. Did I want to call spelling words for years? I did not. But that was what she wanted to do. And so I'm like, okay. And Kailana has a heart condition. And so a lot of her time was spent in bed when she was little. And she would read books. She was just a voracious reader. She read every single book in the children's section at the Lumberton Library. And then she moved up to the next level, the young adult books. And I would have to read those books. And I hate to read. But I would have to read those books before she could read it so I could make sure it was okay for her to read the book. I'm so thankful I did, because there were sometimes I was like, oh, yeah, no, she didn't need to read this when she was a 4th grader. So she's just super, super smart. And then back in January, she had rented a house to do she was going to stay in the house for a few months, and her boyfriend James was buying a house, so they were going to move into that house, but she was going to keep the little house that she was renting to sell her vintage clothing out of and just have a place to do her vintage clothing work. And the first night she stayed there, it had bed bugs. And she woke up that first morning and called and said, Mom, I think there's bed bugs. And I said, surely not. She'd never had bed bugs before. And so she got a Ziploc bag and she shows up at my door and she said, I know it's bed bugs. Well, when she went to the landlord and said, hey, there's bed bugs. And he was like, that's not my responsibility. That's your responsibility. But he had to have known that they were there when he rented her that because she didn't have them. And then all of a sudden she had them. And so she spent hundreds of dollars and another notebook full of ways to treat bed bugs. And she spent 6 weeks treating bed bugs and trying to do it. And she would come and she would tell me all these natural ways that you can kill bed bugs. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, yeah, I've ordered this and I've ordered that. And I'm like, okay. And finally she had eradicated the bed bugs. And so she took all of her vintage clothing to the laundromat. That is why her car was full of bags of clothing, because it was all of her vintage clothing that she had took to laundromat to wash and get prepared to sell again. But she was never going to sell anything to anybody unless it was perfect. So who would have realized that because she had bed bugs in her little house that she rented, that would lead to police thinking that she was homeless? You know, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense at all.
No. How long had she been selling the vintage clothes for?
Oh my gosh. She started collecting vintage clothes as like a 10-year-old. I've always taken them to estate sales and things. And so when she would go to school, she was always dressed so funky. We always called her our hippy dippy girl. And, people would say, oh, where did you get that? And she would go, oh, I found it at a vintage place, or, you know, and she was very good. She was amazing at getting stains and stuff out of things. I would look at stuff and I would say, nope, you do not need to say. And she's like, Mom, it's 50 cents. I think I can get all the stains out of it. I'm like, nope, you know, and she would do it and she would amazingly get it clean, and she would replace buttons and she would sew and just fix and make things look brand new. But she started that just as a young kid.
To seriously do it as a business in the last couple
It's probably
years.
been, probably since she came back from New York. She had actually been collecting clothes in New York with a plan for this. And we would go to estate sale after estate sale. And one day she called me one Saturday morning. She called and she said, oh, Mom, there's this estate sale. It's amazing. They have amazing clothes. Can you come and look? And so I'm like, oh, yeah, because I love estate sales. So I go and I get there and her arms are loaded down with clothes. And she's like, oh, I'm like, are you buying all those? She said, well, I spent all my money yesterday. I'm hoping you would be willing to buy all this because it's 75% off. It's going to be so cheap. And just like that, I became an investor in Kay-Alana's vintage clothing business. But she always was working towards big things, you know, always working and do it. And people said, well, what did she do for a living? And I'm like, well, she was in Titanic and she had a vintage clothing business and she performed. There's several venues here where you come and you do live music, and she was the live music, and she house set for people. She did a lot of stuff. And so to hear that, people would think, well, she's just a slack, but she worked so hard at everything that she did.
Yeah, one of the more like telling things about her personality when we first covered her story is what she had said after she learned Spanish, and how instead of saying, and Tim and I talked about this off air too, when we were that old, if we had learned a second language, we wouldn't have thought about it in the terms of like, now I have the opportunity to open up other people's minds and educations because I can speak to 21 other countries now. And I don't remember a time where we've gone through someone's story like that and had that moment so specifically not relate, but kind of unrelate to me. You know what I mean? Like when learning Spanish, it never occurred to me that I would have the opportunity to express things to people in other countries. And that was part of what she did with her job too, right?
It was really cool. It was really cool. She had got a flat tire, and so we pumped up the tire and got her to this tire change place here in Lumberton. And when we got there, the man was trying to speak to her and trying to make her understand. And she just started speaking to him in Spanish. And he was like, the look on his face, he just lit up. He couldn't believe it. And she speaks it so clearly. She didn't have to think about what she was going to say to him, and you could just see his amazement. And he asked her, would she be willing to come and help teach his family English? And she's like, of course I will. And I actually ended up, because I was worried about the area where she was going to, so I ended up driving her myself, and I sat in the van while she went in. She showed up she had printed up all these papers of things to help them, and literally went in to teach this family that she met on the fly because she had a flat tire, and ended up going to their house for weeks and weeks and weeks teaching them English. And that's who she was and who she is.
What you're saying, I completely relate to, because when I learn or gain some, generally most people, it's how does that benefit me? To what advantage now do I have to gain wealth or to profit from this, or however you want to say that. But for her, to learn Spanish and become fluent in it opened up doors in her mind to go and help other people. And of course it benefited her as well, and it would be to her profit as well to want to know that. But she looked beyond that and said, "No, I can use this to benefit other people as well." And yes, that was her, or that is her heart.
Yeah, that is really amazing, because I think most people, they just want to know how to get to the bathroom and how to order a beer if they go to Mexico or somewhere in Latin America. So what was Kay-Alana's upbringing like? Does she have any siblings?
She has a sister, and they love each other dearly. Kailana, because she was so sick throughout her life, we spent a lot of time at doctors and a lot of time having blood work done, and just a lot of time in the hospital and stuff. And anytime that Kay was having a blood drawn or something, Laren would be standing right there by her, and she'd say, "Right here, sissy, I hold your hand." From the time she was very young, she's 2 years younger than Kay-Alana, but her whole life was spent being there for Kay. And when they were teenagers, we were at a 4-H event, and Kay had asked Laren to go get her a drink. And so Laren just goes and gets her a drink. And our 4-H leader, Ms. Starless, said, "Laren, why did you go get Kay a drink?" And she said, "Well, Kay needed a drink." And she said, "But Kay can walk. Kay's not having an issue right now." But Laren had spent so much of her life just wanting to take care of Kay, and it was not a burden to her to do stuff for Kay because she loved Kay. And when Kay was in college and had events to go to, Laren is amazing at doing hair and makeup, and so she would go and do Kay's hair and makeup. When Kay had to speak for the President's Circle at Lamar University, Laren went and did all her hair, did her makeup. She just looked gorgeous. And Kay just bragged on how much Laren had done for her and what a great sister she is. You see the pictures of them and you know how much they matter. And when Kay was in New York and Laren and Jake called to tell her that they were having a baby, that was when Kay said, I'm going to come home. She wanted to be with Laren. She wanted to be with the baby. And so she got home Ryder was about 4 months old when Kay-Alana finally made it back from New York, because he was born in December of 2020, and Kay made it back at the end of April, the beginning of May from New York. And Kay actually went and stayed with Laren to help her with the baby. And Laren just had another little baby girl, and Kay was at the hospital within hours of the baby being born. And they're just, they just love each other. They're so close. And Laren is just lost without her sister.
Her early life, we're Christians. A lot of their lives revolved around church for the most part. We ended up in a Methodist church when they were about 4 or 5 years. Kay was about 4 years old. We started going to a Methodist church. We're from Louisiana, so we don't have a lot of close family here. It was just us and our 2 girls. And so when we started attending Woodcrest Methodist Church, that became our extended family and still is. And if if we had time to talk about some of the ways that the people at Woodcrest have blessed and helped us through not just uh, this what we're going through now, but our house flooded at Hurricane Harvey, as did a lot of people in our area. But our Woodcrest family was right there for us with that. Hurricane Rita, we had some damage and issues at that point. Our Woodcrest family was there for us. Anytime anybody was sick, there's been a couple of times when Rosa maybe was in the hospital or something. It was that Woodcrest family. So church and faith are a huge. It's a foundational thing for us. Our faith and our trust in Christ, and that church family at Woodcrest is a big part of that. And for Kay and her little sister Laren, that is their first family, so to speak. There are kids there that they grew up with that are still, that they're still very, very close to today. And so after that, she went off to college and then did some travel abroad, study abroad, expanded her education, and that's pretty much how she grew up.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
I'd love to talk a little bit about what you were just talking about. I just want to expand on it a little bit. When you're speaking of this community that you've developed or that you've been nurturing with the church and using your faith, and how they were part of that as well, and they grew up with some of the children that were in that community, I can't help but think about her time in New York and how that must have been so different from having this like community structure based on, it could be based on anything, right? This community structure was based on the church and faith, but it was something that was reliable and comforting and supportive. And how did that impact her time in New York during COVID?
Well, she's always been fearless. We'll start with that. Her first day of kindergarten, it was, don't walk me in, I'll see you later. She went in. When it came to the study abroad stuff, it was take her to the airport and we're crying and she's smiling and waving and getting on the plane and taking off, So she's always been fearless. So when the opportunity, and at the time, she had a boyfriend who had been accepted at a university in New York. And so he was going to New York, and then that's kind of what planted the seed in her mind. Well, I'll go too and go see the Big Apple, and just see what New York has, see what they know that I don't know, if anything. And so they took off, and she actually, I think, drove. They ran a little U-Haul, and I think she did most of the driving to get them to New York. So again, she was the Type A personality in that relationship, and so they get up there and. They find a place to stay in Brooklyn. She gets a job. She called us a couple of times with some job opportunities that she could come up. And anyway, in the end, she ends up, because one of her things that she studied in college was hospitality. She had a minor in hospitality,
yes,
right? So she ended up with a job at the Hampton Inn on Times Square in New York City, which my first thought was, there's a Hampton Inn in Times Square. But there is. And so she got a full-time job there. And to answer your question, she immediately made friends and started to bond with the people she worked with at the Hampton Inn. And so when she would call, she was telling us about this one or that one that she worked with, and different things that they would do. And so she started building a community. That's what she did. And that's what she always does. She starts, building a community wherever she's at. And so that's what she did there. She made friends, and the issue turned out to be, which was the issue for everybody, that just as she got her feet on the ground and things were starting to roll, and I actually talked to her about this one night in 2019, fall of 2019 is when they went up there, and she got the job and she was doing well. And I said, well, how does it feel to be able now, when tourists come in and they ask, you're getting a feel for what's going on in New York City, and they want to know what show to see or where to go to do this, or, the things we see in the movies, Central Park. And she was really excited that she had learned enough and was continuing to learn to be able to do that, to tell people, when the show was, where the Broadway shows were, and what was the things to see. And then all of a sudden, winter of 20, COVID hits. And it was just like, the sad part of this to me was seeing the rug get pulled out from under her when she really felt like she was getting her feet on the ground and really enjoying New York, that all just took a turn and went south as fast as it did.
I think that's, I don't want to get too hung up on it, but I appreciate you telling us that, because I feel like that's part of the story when we talk about other missing individuals during that time period, that it gets so overlooked because everyone thinks about the people who got sick or the people who were hospitalized and now they're experiencing these long symptoms, but they hardly ever talk about what happens to people who didn't get sick, but it had this impact on their life that was something that can't be redone. You know, like you can't ever have that first experience in New York City when you learn everything and you're able to, you know, you're excited about something. So I feel like it's very important that you gave us that story. I feel like there are other parents out there that we've talked about their missing loved ones who around that time need to hear that as well.
Well, Kailana was riding the subway for about an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes every time that she went to work. So she was working 40 hours a week. She was riding the subway in and out, an hour and 30, 45 minutes in, an hour and 30, 45 minutes out, back home. And she had told us that she was scared to death because she was the only one on the subway. And she would make a point of when she would get on that she would make eye contact with the engineer, the person driving the train, because she wanted him to know that she was on the train. And even though the train was just her on it, it still stopped at every single stop as it went. So, and every time the doors would open and she would jump because she was so scared that someone was going to get on and they would hurt her and nobody would even know. There was nobody there to protect her. And so I sent her a can of wasp spray and I said, if somebody is coming to hurt you, you spray them down with this wasp spray. And she laughed at me and she said, Mama, it's illegal to spray somebody down with wasp spray. And I said, I don't care. If someone is coming at you to hurt you, you spray them with the wasp spray. And then when the police get there, you swear to God they were covered in wasp, you know. And even at that, she didn't want to break the law. She didn't want to do anything that would be considered, because she's a rule follower. You know, she did not want to break the law. But I told her, I said, to protect yourself, you're going to need to do this. And when she got back, she said, Mama, I carried that wasp spray with me every time. You know, but imagine that, just a woman on a subway by herself with no one, and the terror that must have been. And she has sent us pictures, and I sent y'all the pictures that you can see. It is just nobody. There is nothing. Those subway platforms are empty. The streets are empty. Everything is empty. And that is what she was dealing with up there, was just an apocalyptic view.
But even in the midst of that, she continued again. Her personality type, was not to give in to that, but to soldier on, so to speak. And she did. She rode the subway. She then walked the rest of the way to her job. And she was one of the few that retained full-time employment, that they kept on full-time through that entire episode. And there were times when there was nobody in that hotel. Just the few that were kept on working, that they were there. And then eventually, I don't know if you recall, but they brought in military medical personnel, and that was the hotel they housed them in. So she suddenly then had a hotel full of people to take care of, and it was the military. And actually, we were watching the news one night, and they were interviewing one of those ladies that was a nurse. And later, I mentioned that to Kay and told her about it, and she had actually remembered meeting the lady. It was interesting. She had that this lady was someone she remembered, and how nice she was. And while they were there, they did an Easter egg hunt for the military personnel. Yeah. So I mean, she kept about her, her wits and her personality, and she made the best of a bad situation.
Yeah, it sure sounds like it. So she was in New York for a little while, and then she came back home towards to you guys. And how long had she been living there before she went missing?
So she got home in late April, early May of 2021, and she went missing March 10th of 2023. So
Yeah, when she came
about
back,
2
she
years.
she was
It was scary.
she had a job where she was like a lot of people at that time, I guess. She remote. She had a job where she was doing editing. She's excellent with English and grammar and editing and writing and all those kind of things. So she had a job doing that, and she stayed with her sister when she first came back, as Rosa said earlier. And then she stayed with one of her best friends for a little while, different things. But she wasn't. You could tell she was jumpy. What would later be diagnosed as post-traumatic stress disorder. I came to learn is a real thing after all. One of those things that I kind of was, well, that sounds good, but is it a real thing? Well, because of what I saw with my daughter, I know it's a real thing now. The PTSD symptoms in her were evident. She was jumpy. She was scared. She continued to wear a mask even when she was in our home. And there was nobody was tested positive. Nobody had COVID. There was nothing to be afraid of. She would continue to wear a mask, even around us. She was frightened for us and for her sister. And she was, one night she left our house to drive back over to her sister's, which is about a 10-minute drive. Lumberton's a small town. And she'd been gone about 5 minutes, and we got a call from a stranger. And he said, "Your daughter is here. She's having an issue. Y'all need to come check on her." So we knew they told us where they were. So we just down the street here. There was a little business that was still open about 9:00 at night. And she had pulled in their driveway of their parking lot, and she had gone in to ask for help. And she was in the middle of what would you call it?
Anxiety attack. And she was fearful. She was shaking. She ended up Rosa took her to she thought she was having a heart attack. She was born with a heart abnormality. She, for the most part, overcame that. I mean, we don't want to make it sound like she was, but she would from time to time have an issue with it. With this anxiety attack, that seemed to be she was keyed in on. Is that my heart's palpitating? I feel like my heart's out of rhythm. I'm going to die. And she actually said that to me, "Daddy, I don't want to die." And I said, "Baby, you're not going to die." And so her mom took her on to the hospital and got her checked out just to ease her mind. And she calmed down. She was okay after that. But that was a real eye opener for us to see her in that condition, that level of anxiety. And so that continued. It got better over time, but eventually she did continue to have some issues with it, and she started to see a therapist about some of these things, and eventually was diagnosed with depression and ADHD along with the PTSD. And that's kind of where the medication comes in that she had been prescribed. And she actually didn't start taking medication for any of this until January of 23, right? January 17th of 2023. And she had told her best friend that she was having trouble with the medicine. And she said, Brittany said, "Well, call your doctor." And so she called the doctor and said that she was having trouble with it. And our family has a rule. We're very susceptible to medication, and it does bad things. And so when she called him, he said, "Well, you just need to keep taking it and your body will get used to taking it." And she just kept telling him that she wasn't doing well with it. And then when that prescription was up, instead of him saying, "Well, let's just keep it at the 50 milligrams, he went from 50 milligrams of Zoloft up to 100 milligrams of Zoloft. And then that, from what we understand, it takes 2 weeks for medication to get to its full strength. And so it had been almost 2 weeks to the day of her starting that 100 milligram dose. She was at Brittany's house on March the 8th. And when she got there, Brittany said she could tell that there was something wrong. And Kay told her, "I haven't slept in 2 days." And at that point, that would have been, she got the prescription on the 20th of February. February is a short month, so you're talking 8 days in February left. And then this was 8 days, so you're talking 16 days there. And if she hadn't slept in 2 days before that, you're right at that 14 days. Brittany said, you've got to talk to that doctor. You've got to tell him that there's a problem, that this is not good. And Kay was like, okay, I'll do that and everything. And so Brittany had gone, they went to bed. And so Brittany got up the next morning, which was the 9th, and she knocked on Kailana's bedroom door, and Kay didn't answer. And Brittany was like, oh, good, she's asleep. She said she was just so thankful that Kay was sleeping because she could tell that Kay was rattled. So Brittany went ahead and went to work. And when she got home that evening, she got a text from Kailana that said no help. And so Brittany started trying to call Kailana and find out what was going on. And Kay wasn't answering the phone. And Brittany just kept calling over and over and over again. And finally, either Brittany got through to Kay or Kay called Brittany back. And she told Brittany, she said, I'm okay. And I'm just driving around and my phone is dying. And so Brittany said, write down my phone number, because she knew that Kay didn't know her phone number. She just had it in her phone. And so the phone went dead, and Brittany called Kailana's boyfriend, James, and said, hey, can you go drive around? Kailana said she's just driving around, but there's something going on. And so James got in his car and started looking for her. He was out till 2:00 in the morning of the 10th looking for Kailana in Beaumont, because she had been in Silsbee. There was no reason for them to believe she would be anywhere else but Beaumont. So he had checked like all the venues where she would sing at. He checked all the coffee shops. He checked everywhere where Kailana would possibly be and couldn't find her. And so finally about 2:00 in the morning, because he had to be at work at like 6 the next morning, he went home and went to bed. He figured she had just made it to another friend's house and went to sleep there, or she'd ended up here. And, so he wasn't concerned. So the next morning, the 10th, Brittany calls me at about 10 in the morning, between 9 and 10 in the morning. And she is completely panicked. Brittany does not panic. I've never heard Brittany panic. And Brittany has been a part of our lives since they were like 13 years old. I've known Brittany, for so many years. And I've never seen Brittany ever get in a panic. And she said, I can't find Kailana. Her locator is off. And she told me all this stuff about James and him looking for her and stuff. And so I said, okay. So I took off work, but I called Robby and I said, hey, there's something going on with Kay. I'm coming to Beaumont to look for her. And he said, maybe she decided to go to South by Southwest, because last year she went to South by Southwest and she actually talked her way into Willie Nelson's VIP party and a bunch of different VIP parties that she should have had no business getting into, but it's Kay. So her dad thought maybe she decided to go to Austin for South by Southwest. So I called Brittany back and I said, hey, can you call y'all's friend in Austin and see if maybe she decided to go to Austin? And Brittany called their friend, and he told her, he said, yes, I talked to Kailana last night. She said her phone was at 3% and she was in Hockley, Texas. So Brittany calls me back. Well, by this time I'm in Beaumont already looking for Kay. I drive to Robby's work and he takes off work and we head to Hockley, Texas. Now, we've never been to Hockley, Texas. We didn't even know where it is, but you can put anything in Google and it will take you there. And so Brittany says, I'm going to file a missing persons report in Hardin County, which is where we live. And I instantly called I called William, which is Kailana's friend in Austin. And he said, I talked to the Harris County Sheriff's Department and they said they're looking for her. None of that made sense to us. That just was bizarre. I instantly called the Austin Police Department to send them to his house for them to do a well check, because I thought maybe she was just falling asleep in the parking lot of his apartment complex, because he'd moved to a new apartment complex and she didn't know the apartment number. And so the Austin Police Department are on their way there. Brittany's filling out a missing persons in Hardin County, and we're driving to get to Hockley. And the whole time we're driving, I'm sending pictures of Kailana. By this time, Kay's boyfriend, James, has taken off work and he's back at their apartment. He's sending the information on her car registration. He's sending pictures. He's sending everything. And I am forcing that stuff out to the Austin police officer. And Brittany is getting it to the Hardin County Sheriff's Department. And so just about the time that we get to Hockley, we just pulled into a McDonald's and my phone rings and it's the Austin police officer. And she says, what he said is true. Harris County is looking for her. They were looking for her with a dog and a helicopter and they can't find her. And she said, I'm so sorry. And we hung up and I instantly called the Harris County Sheriff's Department. And it took a long time before they finally got an officer to contact me. And the first thing this officer said to me was, is your daughter homeless? And I said, no, sir, she is not. He said, her car was full of bags of clothes. And I said, yes, sir, she has a vintage clothing business. I'm trying to explain to him, that she had to go to laundromat and stuff. He said, well, your daughter's a drug addict, right? And I said, no, sir, she is not. She has a heart condition. She does not do anything like that. And he's like, oh, well, she's in a lot of trouble and she's going to jail for a long time. And I am crying. I'm like, we don't know what's going on. We're like, she's never even been in trouble. What in the world has happened? And he said, she damaged some people's property. And the way he was talking to me, I thought she must have ran through these people's house. And the way that he was treating me and the rudeness. And I said, can you please meet us where this is? And I'm asking about her car. And he said, her car's impounded. And okay. And so he says, I'm getting off work. I'm not going to come meet y'all, but here's the address. And so we head to the address to see what happened and to talk to the people. We get there and the man at the address, he's outside in the yard and he starts talking to us and he tells Robby, do you want to go down and look at her car? Her car is down. And we said, we thought it was impounded. They told us it was impounded. He said, no, it's still down there, bogged down in the woods. And so Robby went with him and the lady of the house come out and she began to tell me that she woke up at 5:30 that morning. She looked out. She saw that there was a car in her driveway. She goes out. She couldn't wake Kay-Alana up. So she called the police and she said, I thought she was dead. She called the police and apparently they called the homeowners association because they had a problem in their neighborhood. They had an Airbnb that was right next door to them. And the homeowners association was trying to get rid of this Airbnb. And so a family had come to stay there and they had come in the middle of the night. They had a family member had a stroke on the airplane ride in. And so they ended up coming in late in the middle of the night. And we found out later that Kailana had actually been parked in that driveway up against the gate. And when they came in, they knocked on Kay's window and woke her up and she just moved one driveway over. Somehow or another, now we've heard that there was a constable that came before the police showed up, before Harris County Sheriff's Department showed up, and they woke Kailana up. And the lady said that when Kailana was trying to get out of her driveway, she said, I thought she was going to hit my car, but she carefully backed away from it. She said, I thought she was going to hit our pump house, and she backed away from that. She said she ended up driving across our grass and down to the street. Well, when she got down to the street to where the cul-de-sac let out, the homeowners association president had blocked the street. So she couldn't get out. They had trapped her. And so she backed her car up and she went back and she was going to go the other way. Now, bear in mind, they want her to leave. They want her to leave, except they blocked her so she can't leave. And so she drives back and all the other houses have gates. And the only house that doesn't have a gate is this driveway that she was originally at. And so they said she was sitting in her car and the police came up to try to get in when the police got there. Well, the homeowners association president, when she was trying to get out of the cul-de-sac, he had started snapping pictures of her. And because of those pictures, we know that she was not only having a mental crisis, that she was actually in an active cardiac event. Her lips were completely blue. And that is what happens when she goes into AFib. And so we knew that she was in the middle of a cardiac event. And so when the police came up to the car and tried to get in, they said Kailana was frantically trying to lock the door. And they were trying to get in. And they said she pulled up to a fence and she was like parked up against the fence. And the police officer busted out her window. Now, at that point, we had no idea that they had busted her window out with a 2x4. But they had picked up, we don't know if she maybe, when she drove up to the fence, that she broke the fence a little bit and they picked up the 2x4 from the broken fence. But they shattered her driver's side window. And at that point, she drove through that fence, down a little alleyway into the next door neighbor's yard. He had an outbuilding. She drove around his outbuilding. He said, I don't know how she didn't hit my building. He said it was very narrow. And then out through his barbed wire fence and across a pasture where she bogged her car down in the woods. And the man at that house said, we had to urge the police. He said she was never going more than 3 or 4 miles an hour. He said the police would have been able to walk up to the car and they weren't following it. And they had to urge them to follow her. And when they got down to another gate thing, the police were going to stop and they said, what are you doing? And he said, well, I don't know if we can go any farther. And they said, well, y'all are the police. Y'all are following somebody that y'all are saying is a criminal. They had been freely calling her a homeless drug addict with warrants. They didn't even know who she was. They hadn't even run her plates at that point, we found out. They didn't run her plates until it was already, till they were down there in the woods where her car was bogged down. So they had no idea who she was, nothing about her. And they identified her on her driver's license by the picture that the Homeowners Association president took of her. So that's how they identified that, yes, this was Kay-Alana. So they urged them to go down. When they got down to the car, they let the people in the neighborhood went with them. And we actually have a video that was shot as they approached her car with a gun pointed at the car. Kay was already gone. And then he swings around limp-wristed towards the woods with the gun. Well, later we find out that they were telling people that they thought that she had a shotgun. The only thing that Kailana had in her car was a charcuterie board, which was a really big, it was a huge charcuterie board that she used to display her jewelry, her vintage jewelry on. They waited 45, they didn't go into the woods to search for her. They waited for the dog and the helicopter to get there to search for her. And that was 45 minutes.
I don't understand. This isn't even a question. I'm sorry that you have to keep telling this story because it escalates so fast. It escalates so unnecessarily. I just don't understand where it is in individuals' heads when their job is to protect and serve, to smash out the driver's side window of a young woman who is clearly having some sort of like emotional break. Like a shotgun? That's a shotgun. Like we're not following her in the woods because she might have a shotgun. Why wasn't she using the shotgun if she was so dangerous before? And she can meticulously maneuver her car around other people. And I'm so sorry. Like I can't even like form words.
The 2x4 thing, I just want to make it clear that the 2x4, we didn't know about that until we read it in the police report because it sounds so far-fetched that a police officer would use a 2x4 to bust out somebody's window. And actually, when we went downtown to file a complaint about this whole situation, when I was given my complaint statement and talked about the 2x4, the officer who took my complaint called that a tool of convenience. That's why he used the 2x4, because it was a tool of convenience. Yeah.
Isn't this a police officer who might have something in his belt that could do the same job if he had to do it?
Same question I asked, but apparently those are tools that the officers have to pay for themselves, and maybe he couldn't afford one of those.
Wow.
How big is that sheriff's office?
This is Harris County. This is Houston.
Harris County
is Houston. So big.
Okay, so there's no excuses. It's not a 4-person force.
They have thousands of
They
employees.
also advertise themselves to be the most well-trained in mental health situations in the nation.
Number one.
I would hate to see the worst trained department. And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
It really is it's a series of unfortunate events that if any of these things had not happened or it happened just a little bit differently, we wouldn't be where we are, but here we are. Another thing that's part of this story is prior to reaching that neighborhood, which is an upscale neighborhood, really nice neighborhood, prior to that, she had been in another big subdivision at about 3:30 to 3:45 in the morning, and she had approached the door. And let me say this, I'm thankful she didn't get shot at some point during all this, because she was approaching people's doors, acting very erratically. She was clearly having a mental health crisis and was manic. But this lady at this one particular house has her on her Ring camera acting this way. And that lady called the Harris County Sheriff's Department. She called it in. There's a lady at my door. She's not drunk. She's not on drugs. She's having some kind of a mental health crisis. We need help here. Nobody came. 30 minutes later, she called them again. Told them, no, by then Kay was gone, but she just wanted to tell them again, y'all need, this lady's out there somewhere. So that information was out there, or should have been available to a patrol officer in that area. So that's another question we have. Did they even relay any of this information to their patrol officers at that time, that there was a lady in distress driving around this area in a manic state? Because if they had even had that information, it could have been, it could have changed the whole situation.
To back it up just a little bit, when you had said that you spoke to somebody, you spoke to an officer, they called you, and they said that they asked you if you knew if your daughter was homeless and if you knew if your daughter was a drug addict. This was after all of this happened, right?
Yes, they'd already chased her in the woods with a helicopter. They'd already done all of this. This was them when we got there. Now you have to remember, we were there within hours of this happening. What homeless drug addicts, family members are there within hours of something that happened with nobody calling us. Nobody called us. We were there because Brittany had said that Kay could be in danger and that she was in Hockley, and we were headed there. That is not the action of a family that has somebody in their family that does drugs, that is homeless, that is just nomadic, and you don't ever know where they are. When Kay-Alana was in Paris, when she was in France during her study abroad, she would FaceTime us every day. My little babies I babysit would be on the phone talking to KK, and she'd be singing to them in French and stuff. Literally, we are in contact with each other all the time. We are constantly in contact. And for them to totally disregard, we were thinking that when we got out there to this site, because everything they were saying about what was going on, we thought there would be a manhunt out there in those woods. Nobody was there. They didn't even search for maybe not even 2 hours for her. They literally just rolled up and left. A woman in distress. And part of the problem is when Robby got down to the car with the man, he found Kay-Alana's shoes and they were full of glass, and he dumped the glass out of her shoes. And then he followed what he thought was the path, and there was a log that went across Spring Creek, and he found Kay-Alana's bare footprints on the other side of the creek, which at that point meant that she was in Montgomery County. And it was Harris County's responsibility, the minute that they thought that there was a possibility that she was headed towards Montgomery County, was to call Montgomery County. And they did not call Montgomery County for 3 hours. 3. And we actually talked to the police officer that took that call, and he said, we would have been out there, but nobody called us. And they believe that she came out on Decker Prairie Rose Hill Road. Had they called the police and had there been police on Decker Prairie Rose Hill Road, I believe that Kay-Alana would have run with all her might to get to a police car, because she has grown up surrounded by police officers. She house sits for a retired Texas state trooper here in Beaumont. Her great uncles, one was the chief of police in Leesville, our little hometown. The other one was a Vernon Parish sheriff's deputy. She has lots of friends that she went to school with that are police officers. She had no reason to be scared of police officers, but she did have reason to be scared of people that were flashing pictures of her and people that were trying to get into her car and people that busted her car window out with a 2x4. She had reason to be scared of them. And had they just called Montgomery County, we believe she would have run to that police officer. And we have been out there on Decker Prairie, Rose Hill Road. We've spent hundreds of hours out there passing out flyers. We've walked all those subdivisions out there. We've stood at the corner of Decker Prairie, Rose Hill, and Co-Loop and passed out thousands of flyers with Kailana's picture on it. And nobody ever saw her. That was on a Friday morning during rush hour when people were trying to get to work in the morning, and nobody has come forward and said that they saw her on that road. Not one single person.
This flyer. There's a whole lot of these out there.
We have passed out over 25,000 flyers ourselves. And then her friends have printed flyers. There was a man that went to a podcast event this past or weekend before last. He printed up his own flyers and passed them out. We have people printing up flyers and passing out flyers constantly. We have a big sign on Decker Prairie, Rose Hill Road, asking people to call us if they have information. We have not received one credible sighting of her. Nothing since that morning. Nothing since she drove her car across that pasture. Harris County Sheriff's Department has hindered us at every step of the way. They put 3 felony warrants on her and 2 misdemeanors. So they've accused her of evading arrest, attempted assault of a police officer, and some other failure to identify. So they had to look at pictures and a driver's license to make sure that it was her. You know, they had no idea who they were dealing with. They also had 2 warrants that had to do with the property damage. Now, before we even got there, they had given the homeowners Kay-Alana's insurance information, and they had already filed the claim against the insurance. The insurance company has already paid those homeowners. And so we thought that that would open the way for them to drop these warrants. It did not. In fact, they're going to use those claims to back up their warrants, the reason for having these warrants. So they're going to do that. But because those warrants were in place, we got our pastor had been the pastor at a church in the Houston area, and one of his church members was a member of Texas EquiSearch, which is the #1 search group probably across the United States. So Mark with Texas EquiSearch got in touch with us that morning. We're out there in the woods searching for Kailana. Mark calls and he says, y'all have to get a missing persons report filed. And we had just got a call from Hardin County saying they had canceled the missing persons in Hardin County because Kailana had been spotted in Harris County. Called Harris County and they said we had to go back over to the people's house where Kay went missing from. So I just sent the lady a message. I said, we're going to be on the street out in front of your house. We're not going to bother y'all. We're just going to be there because we have to file a missing persons report. Well, by then, Kailana's best friend and her husband were already on their way over. And this is getting later in the day. By this time, it's like 5 o'clock. It's getting dark. And we're standing out there in this little community, and all the people start coming out and they start talking to us. And they're telling us what they saw and they're telling us what happened. And I'm going up to people and I'm introducing myself. And I walk up to a man and I put my hand out and I say, hi, I'm Rosa Calhoun and my daughter is. And before I can even say her name, he says, I Googled your lovely daughter. I think there's been a horrible mistake. Within minutes of this going down, and once they found out her name, this man knew there had been a horrible mistake. They knew that this was not what they had been told. And on the police report, they even say there were no witnesses, but everybody out there told us it was like a circus. Everybody was out there. Everybody saw what was going on. So how could they say on the police report that there were no witnesses?
Have they released any body cam footage, or do they plan to?
No, they. It's been several different people have filed the paperwork and gone through the steps to try to get that through the Freedom of Information Act and whatever else is involved in that. But their answer is it's an ongoing investigation, and therefore they don't have to give up the body cam
They
footage, which is
refuse.
mind-boggling when you see body cam footage from events that happened this morning on TV tonight. It's crazy how fast some of this body cam footage is out there. But yeah, this somehow can't be released. So no, there's no body cam footage out there at this point.
Her missing persons detective, he said, "Oh, well, we want to, I've tried to get them to show it to y'all. I've tried to get them, but they won't show it to y'all." And that's part of it too, is that when we filed the missing persons, that officer that took the missing persons report, he said, when these warrants go into effect, the missing persons will go away and she will be a fugitive. And so, Robby had been talking to Mark, and Mark said, we got to get out there and search before those warrants go into effect. So that morning, Saturday morning, we were unprepared. We stayed the night in a hotel. We watched all the news. No news station carried any report at all that there was a fugitive girl out there with a shotgun. None of this was carried. None of it was carried that she had assaulted a police officer. Nothing at all on the news. I'm like, you think you have a dangerous fugitive out there and you don't put it on your news? You don't have it anywhere out there with her pictures out there? So Mark, we met him Saturday morning, and they had 6 hours before those warrants went into effect, where they did something they called mowing the grass, where they went back and forth. And he said in that area, they covered about 200 miles while they were searching for her, any sign of her. And he said that they believed that also she had made it to Decker Prairie Rose Hill Road.
Yeah, just real quick, the Texas EquiSearch, I know you guys know who they are. They are probably the premier missing persons volunteer organization maybe in the world. I don't know. These guys are great. But they have a rule, and it makes perfect sense that they're a volunteer organization. They do not search for possible criminals, people that might be dangerous. They can't put themselves in that position. So that was the big key with the warrants, is once those warrants were in place, then on paper at least, we're dealing with a wanted criminal. And so we can't have our volunteer organization out there in the woods. And so that was the rub between the Harris County Sheriff's Department and Texas EquiSearch. And they've got a good working relationship in most cases, but occasionally something like this might come up and it becomes a problem. But they did everything they could do with the window of opportunity that they had. And now I will say that since then, probably been a couple of months ago now, that I don't know what the conversation was, because the warrants are still in place, but Texas EquiSearch says, we're going to help y'all. So they're back on the job.
Great.
Their volunteer organization has been back, and they've searched that immediate area now probably 3 or 4 times. There's no evidence of, a body or any remains or anything like that. We remain confident that somehow she got out of those woods. The question becomes, how did she get out? And from there, where did she go? But EquiSearch is back and have been just tremendously, especially at this stage of this situation for us, because we're at 180 days today in this ongoing trial. And the stages that you go through in something like this, and let me say, we've met some people that have been doing this for years. There's some wonderful people we have met who have missing loved ones, and it's years for them. So by comparison, we're very early in this, and hopefully it doesn't turn into years for us, but that could happen. But the early stage of this, you're on adrenaline. It's and this is going to be short. We're gonna find her here in a few days. Something's going to happen. And we're following up every lead and doing everything we can, and that turns into a month, 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months. So we were hitting a wall where we didn't know what else to do, and Texas EquiSearch stepped back in at just the right time, and it was like getting rescued ourselves, because now they've got tools that they can utilize. They got her on billboards. They went back to mapping out search areas. They went back to doing what they do best. And so we're very, very thankful for Texas EquiSearch. I can't say that enough.
And we did get her missing status put back in. It took 15 days. And all of that happened because Brittany and my niece Brienne and Kay-Alana's boyfriend, they did the updates for Kay-Alana Turner page. And through that, they were posting minute by minute what was going on and what we were fighting and what the warrants were saying. And there was a man that got on there and said, this can't be true. You can have a missing persons with a warrant. And we said, no, you can't. And he said, I'm retired from the Harris County Sheriff's Department and I worked in the warrants division and you can have a missing persons. And so Brittany ended up calling him because she'd said that Kay had $80,000 bond set on her. And he said, murderers don't have an $80,000 bond. And so Brittany sent him the proof and he said, this is unbelievable. And so he walked Brittany step by step through what she needed to do to get that missing persons reinstated. And so while Robby was filling out the complaint against the police officer, me and Brittany were in downtown Houston at the police station trying to figure out how to get her missing persons reinstated. And they kept giving us the runaround. And every time they would, Brittany would say, no, this is what they told us. And so somehow or another, we ended up over at the jail is where they sent us to. And when they sent us there, the lady that was behind the desk there, she said, you're at the Harris County jail. We have nothing to do with this. And Brittany said, they told us to come here. There is somebody here we're supposed to talk to, and we need to talk to somebody. And finally, this guy comes out from the back, and he's looking at us, and he says, I don't know why y'all are here. This is the Harris County Jail. You're at the wrong place. And she said, they sent us here. There's supposed to be somebody here that's going to help us. And he said, well, I used to work in the warrants division. Let me see what I can do. And he got on the phone and he'd say, well, that one's in court or this one's there. And he spent 2.5 hours. In 2.5 hours, he comes out from the back and he's holding a piece of paper out to us. And he said, you have your missing persons reinstated. And me and Brittany just break down and cry. And we call Robby, and Robby calls Kay's original missing person detective and said, they're telling us it's back reinstated. The guy said, never heard of this happening, but let me check. And we had got a tip that there was a possible sighting in Conroe, which is about an hour from where we were. So we had jumped in the van to go to Conroe. And by the time we got to Conroe, the missing persons detective was calling back saying, you got your missing persons. She's reinstated as a missing persons, and they're running those warrants side by side.
So that's 15 days that she was not regarded as a missing person. Now, the warrants are still in place, so as far as like Texas EquiSearch, they still wouldn't have been able to help us. But having her as a missing person opens up other opportunities, possibly for media, and there's other organizations you might be able to get help. But to go for 15 days because the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing in the Harris County Sheriff's Department is so infuriating. And there's these loopholes. There's a new law that just went into place here this first of this month called John and Joseph Law. We were at a meeting for families of missing persons here last month over in Houston, and the family that was instrumental in getting this loophole closed is the loophole was that if you go to a hospital as a John Doe or a Jane Doe and you die there, they send you to the boot hill, so to speak, and you bypass identification by the examiner's office.
And they just bury you. And so there are missing people
in the cemetery, in the county cemetery, that have not been identified because of that loophole.
They didn't take pictures of them. They didn't do DNA, nothing. And now it went into effect on the 1st of September that they have to do that. And so then I had to call Kay-Alana's missing person detective because could she have died in a hospital and they not know who she was? He's like, oh, yeah, I'm just hearing about this. Let me check. They knew and at that point, it had been months that we had been searching for her. And he had to call and check and make sure that she wasn't buried in the county cemetery just as a Jane Doe.
Yeah, and that's something that's a loophole he was even unaware of. He's like, that can't be right. We don't just bury people without knowing who they are. Yeah, you do. And have done it forever.
Yeah, like what is this the 1600s? Like that's barbaric.
Yeah, it was a loophole though, and this family had learned about this because their situation with their missing loved one had put them in a situation where their loved one was being buried without being identified, And that's how they learned about this loophole and then went to work to get legislation to close the loophole.
Wow.
And so it's really astounding some of the things you learn going through something like this.
Yeah, we're going to be working on legislation. Kailana's car was auctioned off. And so that a missing person's property cannot just be auctioned off. When we tried to get her car, they said that we couldn't have it because our name wasn't on the title and we weren't on the insurance. So we couldn't have it yet. They threw away all her stuff that was in her car and auctioned her car off to a total stranger, and they wouldn't let us have it.
What? But I thought she was this. I thought she had warrants. I thought she was a criminal. I thought this car might be evidence in some sort of criminal case.
When they told us that her car was impounded, they walked away from that car that day and never went back to it again. The property owner had that car towed and was towed to a tow yard, and that's who we tried to get the car from. And they told us in other words, the cops never took another look at that car after that day. The weapon of choice, if you will, for her to assault and possibly, attempted murder, they don't even want it anymore. They never looked at it again. And then the lot that it was towed to, or those were the people that wouldn't let us have it. But then after 90 days, they can auction it off without notifying us or anybody else.
They auction it for a price, right? Who gets paid for that?
They do, because they have the storage fees.
Yeah,
That's unbelievable.
So that is legislation that we're going to be working on. We're also going to be working on legislation that on driver's license, you can put a HIPAA contact, because with Kay-Alana's doctor, we had her medication, her purse, and everything was still in the car. So her medication was in her purse. And when we called him, he said, I can't even tell you if I'm her doctor. And I said, well, I know you're her doctor because I have her medication. It has your name on it. And he said, well, I can't say anything about that. And I said, well, the Harris County Sheriff's Department is going to be contacting you. And he said, oh, they never do in this situation. And I just came unglued, because I said, so what you're telling me is that you have over-medicated another person to the point that the police were involved and you don't have any responsibility? And he said, I can't talk about that because of HIPAA. Because of HIPAA. So
wow.
Yes. So that is infuriating. And they have told us that if we're at a hospital and we're asking about her and we're on one side of the curtain and she's on the other side of the curtain, that they don't have to tell us that she's there because of HIPAA. And so we're going to work on legislation to get it passed where that you have a HIPAA contact on your driver's license, just like it says you're a organ donor.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity for someone. There was a lady that her dad had been in the hospital and they didn't know it, and they released him from the hospital. And when they found him, he was still in his hospital gown, kind of like that little man that came up to Kay-Alana's apartment. He was still in his hospital gown when they found his body. And they had been calling hospitals trying to find her daddy, and they couldn't because of HIPAA.
It's ridiculous.
So there has to be legislation. You have to have legislation. There are so many things that we never knew before March the 10th. And now we know. And so it's our responsibility as the family of a missing person to try to close some of these loopholes to help the next family. Because whatever we do now is not going to help Kay-Alana, but it's going to help the next person, the next family that their kid goes missing and their car's impounded so they don't auction it off, or that they're in the hospital and you can actually walk in there and say, I'm a HIPAA contact for this person. Can you check? Because we had Kay-Alana's driver's license. We have all Kay-Alana's. We got her purse and her overnight bag out of the car. We have that. So we had all that information.
Yeah, they the only thing they took that day was her phone. She dropped her phone. It was on the ground. One of them came by and said, oh, look, her phone. They picked it up. And so the police still have that phone. But that was all. They didn't take her purse. They didn't take her identification. They didn't take the supposed shotgun charcuterie board. They didn't take anything.
Yeah, the charcuterie board.
And just walked away from the car.
Where was her phone found?
Right next to the car on the ground. She had dropped it as she was getting out of the car. So she dropped her phone. She took nothing else with her. She ran out of her shoes because of the glass that were in her shoes. So she was barefooted in a long, hot pink dress running through the big thicket, and they couldn't find her.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
I just want to say for a second, I want to lift up the law enforcement people, the first responders, fire department people that we've met along the way. Tomball Police Department, Montgomery County Police Department, Waller County Police Department, Sheriff's Department. A lot of great people. So we don't want to make this sound like we're running down law enforcement. We are not.
Oh my gosh!
And there's good people in Harris County Sheriff's Department as well. And, like the man at the jail that helped them get the missing person reinstated. He took 2.5 hours to work on that. So they're good people. And so we don't want to just, make this sound like we're bashing law. We are not.
We are law enforcement people. We believe in law enforcement. And until this happened, we would have thought that law enforcement was trained to handle a mental health crisis. But as we're finding out, they are not. They are ill-equipped to handle a mental health crisis.
Absolutely. I think that's important to say, that you don't have to be like anti or pro law enforcement to look at this and say this just wasn't handled at all in a way that people who are put in that position are supposed to handle it. And I'm not anti law enforcement, but you can't hear this story and say that they didn't do what they needed to do. They did the opposite of what they were supposed to do. They put somebody in danger. They escalated the situation. And it's so terrible that this is the result. And anything you need us to do, please, always reach out. You have our contact information. What is the action that you need people to take if they see Kay-Alana? This was one of the rare moments where we did our episode and we were like, we feel uncomfortable giving the Harris County Police information out. So coming from the two of you, what should people do?
We're telling people to call Texas EquiSearch, but Montgomery County has been amazing. Waller County has been amazing. Tomball Police Department has run, I don't know how many leads down. And I want to tell you, the people of the Tomball, Texas area, we did not know that when we rolled in there on March the 10th, we did not know one single soul. We had nobody. We had no friends. We had nothing. And we have made lifelong friends there. We have people that if there's a sighting that's possibly Kay-Alana and we put it out there that we need somebody to go, we'll have 10 people in their cars on the way to search to look for her. This community has come alongside us, and Lumberton, Texas owes them a debt of gratitude because the way that they have treated one of their own. They have been amazing to us, and we cannot sing the praises of this community more. There's no way we will ever be able to repay them. The number of people that have stood and passed out fires, the number of people that have helped us has been unbelievable. Unbelievable.
If you could, if you don't mind, in your when you upload this, put a couple of links. It would give people all the information they need. One of those is updates for Kay-Alana Turner. It's the Facebook page that was built just for this enterprise. And then also there's Texas EquiSearch, their website, their Facebook rather. Texas EquiSearch is Facebook. And there's information there on them as well. And that's probably the two best ways to get information.
And Texas EquiSearch did a video with Robby, and that is out there. That video has had over 75,000 views. We need people to see that video. We need people talking. We need people talking about this because it's not going to make the media in Harris County. The only coverage that we've really got in Harris County is from Gabby Hart with Fox 26. She has a program called The Missing, and she has been amazing. She has done as much as she could to help us. And Rowan, and I can't pronounce his last name, from KPRC, he came out and did a story after we got the missing persons reinstated. So that is the only coverage that we've had. I've done interviews with the Houston Chronicle, and then they've come back and said, oh, we're not going to go forward with your story. I've done interviews with other TV stations, and they've said, we're not going to go forward with your story. So we feel like at this point, we need national coverage. If we don't get national coverage, we're not going to get any coverage. And we don't know. She could be anywhere in the United States now. Houston is the hub of sex trafficking, and we would hate to think that she's such an innocent, but we need people to know about her. We need people to hear her story, and we need national coverage on this, or we're not going to get any help. Harris County has already told us that it's a cold case. That means they just move her down in the stack and she no longer matters to them. And you would think that you have a fugitive out there that has apparently attempted to hurt a police officer, and you're not going to look for them. You're not going to do everything in your power to find them. It's ridiculous, because they know that she's innocent. They know. And as long as she's not found, then they don't have to give the video to her lawyer. They don't have to do anything. They can just sweep this under the rug and let it go.
They've already said that she's a cold case. It's been since March of this year.
Oh, they told us that in April. We were at the day of the missing in Houston, and they told us that they viewed it as a cold case in April.
Wow.
She wasn't even missing for 2 months at that point, and it was a cold case to them because there had not been one single sighting of her. Nothing. Since that morning of March the 10th. We also would like people to know that Kay-Alana speaks fluent Spanish. She speaks fluent French. So if she is taken in by a Hispanic family, and we don't know if she had a head injury, we don't know. And she may not even know who she is, but she speaks Spanish. And so if she is in with the Spanish community, you would not know, other than the fact that she looks Caucasian, you would have no idea that you were speaking to a girl that was born in Texas. We need to reach that Hispanic community, and we haven't had that door has been shut to us.
Absolutely. And we do have a lot of colleagues that do shows like this that we can put you in touch with in the future, in the very near future, just so you can get out there as much as possible, because these shows tend to reach a different type of audience than like your regular news broadcasts. So just casting that net is important, and we're more than happy to help you out with that. And we'll put all the links in the show notes for any action item. God, I'm so sorry to hear this, and our hearts go out to you. It's a combination of how you guys are focusing on changing legislation is admirable, because it's inspiring. So anything you need from us, just let us know. If you have any updates, you're more than welcome to come back on. And really, I hope this has a positive resolution.
Thank you
so much. And our we sit on the porch and we look down the road and we look out our window and we have strong faith that she is alive. Whatever the circumstances are that have kept her from being able to get in touch with us or has kept her from us, we don't know. I like to tell people that however this turns out will not be any more strange than how we got here. But we have faith that it's going to have a good end, and that we will have our daughter back alive and well, and having run this course will be better for it in the end. And if it turns out any other way, our faith will remain as strong, and know that God has a plan to use that for good as well.
And I tell people that I have a Kay-Alana size hole in my heart, and that nothing will replace that I will look for her till the day she's found or the day I die, because there's nothing that can replace her in my heart.